with another video. Um, for those of you that don't know, I have grown flowers for 3 years, but this will be my first year as an official flower farmer. And so I want to make sure that I'm doing it right. I want to make sure that I am maximizing my potential and leaving no profit on the table. So today I'm interviewing with B.A.R.E Flower Farm, and I know that she has a lot to share, and I want to hear all of it. Like, I literally watch almost every video that she puts out, and it's always these amazing facts on numbers, and it's very specific and concise. It's easy to understand, and it's easy to see how she does what she does. So she's my second live guest here on Talk to Me Thursday, and it's just a place where like-minded people can come and connect and talk about what we're interested in, flowers and selling flowers. So for reference, I'm in Zone 7B, Virginia. And so I'm just talking to people with different specialties, and I'm seeing things in them that I think are hidden gems or that are gems. And I just want to share it with other people. So she's in New Jersey. And the reason I picked her, one is because she did this pregnant with her first child. So like she deserves all like the claps and all the awards and stuff. And the reason I chose her is because she works full time and she's doing this part time. So I thought that that would be a great mix, because a lot of times flower farmers, they do this full time. And so I think it's really good to get perspective on someone who's doing it part time. So here we go. Would you go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us all about your journey?
Yeah, so thank you for that kind introduction. My name is Jesse, for those of you who don't know. So I am in New Jersey, and now our zone is actually 7A. So it's not too far off from a frost and climate perspective than Grace, but obviously there's more to zones or growing than just zones. So um, I do flower farm part time. I'm going into my third year of flower farming. I actually farm on a relatively small scale, I would say. I have an enclosed 40 by 90-foot area with very generous walkways, and I'm actually shrinking the growing space within there. And then this time of year is my specialty, where I grow winter tulips, and I do what we call forcing tulips, which means that we're ultimately tricking the tulip bulb into thinking that it's spring, giving it the right conditions indoors to force it to bloom. So, tulips are my biggest crop. I have about like 10,000 that I'm forcing this winter season. And then when the tulips are done, then we obviously have field tulips and some other stuff. Then I do grow like the normal route outside. But I think it's also worth mentioning that I sell primarily to wholesale like designers and florists, as well as some retail customers. But over time, I've been trying to shift away from retail and into wholesale. So my first year, it was 100% retail. Last year, it was about 30% wholesale, 70% retail. And then going into next year, the goal is to get to 70% wholesale, 30% retail. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Wow. That's amazing. Okay. So I'm going to do something different here in just a moment, but I don't want to get ahead of myself. I want to know, if you had the ability to start over, how would you invest different? I can see that you want to shrink your space. I've been following the journey, so I have seen how the journey has gone, but this is your time to talk. So if you could do things different, if you could start over, how would you invest different? How would you start different?
I would have gotten a tractor from day one. Um, we ended up getting a tractor this past year, and it wasn't actually for
Mhm.
flower farming purposes. It was because we needed to seed grass in areas that we excavated for a septic project, as well as building this pole barn that we put up. So, obviously, now that we have a tractor, you can see how easy things become, how much less time they take. The reason why I say I would have invested in a tractor up front is because when we cleared our field, it was super, super manual. We rented something called a sod cutter, which is basically this tool that you can get from like a Home Depot or a Lowe's, and it cuts through the sod. You can cut through like an inch up to like, I want to say like 2.5 inches. So literally removes the sod, and then you have to literally figure out where to put the sod. So a tractor would have been really, really helpful here. My husband and I tried to manually move it into our tree line. So we have a lot of property where we can actually put off sod, but it got to the point where it was just so much that we had people who came from Facebook Marketplace to bring sod home. If you ever have extra sod and you put it up for free on Facebook Marketplace, you will literally have a line out the door. So it's something you want to at least charge like $5 to weed out the people who come in sedans, right? Because the goal is to get like people with like pickup trucks or whatever to come. So that's the first thing I would do. And then the second thing that I would actually do differently, not in terms of investing, but just a practice is I would have tilled the the first go around with the land. And it's because there are very aggressive grasses that we have where we ended up taking off the clump, but the roots were still in the ground. And so these are ones that it's almost like pinching. So I inherently created more grass that came up. But if I tilled that first time around, I would have gotten rid of it, right? And I remember that when we lifted the sod, there were so many earthworms, and I felt good about just like, oh, like I'm not tilling and getting rid of these earthworms. And it really came to bite me in the butt in year two, because year one, those roots hadn't regenerated enough for those weed grasses to really come up crazy strong. Year two, they did, and I spent an inordinate amount of time weeding. So that's where I would have invested my or reinvested my time in year one if I could go back.
Okay. That's really good to hear and to know. So when I review all the videos on your channel, your top video is the most least profitable flower that you grow. And it's really just about profitability. And so I want the conversation to be about profitability per stem, by bouquet, and just overall. So I think I want to start with like, how do we keep the profitability, the focus of all that we do on the flower farm? And one thing that I know about you is that you know like all of your numbers. Your attention to your in detail to numbers is probably one of the biggest reasons that I tune into you. And so I have here some of your packaging, and I'm bringing that out and I'm sharing that because one thing I know about you is that you know exactly how much each card costs, you know how much each bulb costs, you know how much your paper costs, and I think that that is so important. I think in a video you said the sleeve is 25 cents, the bulb is 45 cents, and I think 15 cents for the card.
Wow, look at you.
So I will, yeah, I have been paying attention. And so I want to just give you a chance to kind of talk about how do we keep the profitability like in the forefront of our minds, and how can we begin to really take on these numbers. I always have this here as my setting, so I needed to have that today, but I definitely planned on switching
Yeah.
out to put. Oh, you can't see it. Wait, wait, wait. Okay, let me. So you talk, and I'll get this here, and if I can't get this here, I'll just hold it
Yeah, yeah,
because
absolutely.
I ordered these just for this video, and just so that everybody could see. Okay, so
Yeah.
I'm gonna put this away now that we kind of talked about it, and I'll just how about that?
Yeah. Talk about numbers. So yeah. So I want to actually start off by saying that I am actually a very high level person. Like attention to detail is not actually my forte. It is my
Okay.
husband's forte. So there's kind of
Mm.
between us. Like he is the person in the relationship who logs into our bank account like every couple of days to make sure like nothing fraud is happening. And I don't log into the bank account for sometimes like months, even a quarter. Like I sounds bad. I don't check my credit card statements, right? I'm a much higher level person. And when I first met my husband, I asked him, I was like, so you log into your bank account every single day. Can you tell me how much money you think we need to retire? Like what's that high level number look like? And he was like, oh, that's a really good question. And so I think that's a really good example of like how I think, right? Like I think just higher picture, and I tend to think about things that move the needle. Now that being said, when we start getting into profitability and knowing your numbers, like you do need to know, okay, a sleeve is 25 cents, a card is 15 cents, right? These are all numbers including shipping, right? So what is the full out of pocket cost that you're paying for these items? So let's break up profit into the components that make up profit. You've got the revenue portion and you've got the
Okay.
cost portion, right? I would say that most people hopefully are at least tracking their revenue portion because that's the more exciting part about starting a business, right? Like how much did you sell? So typically I don't see people having an issue with getting that part of the data. Where I see people getting into trouble is the cost side of it, right? Where either they don't have something that can help automate track their costs or they just think that hey, like that's something that I'll put off later. So in order to arrive at just what your profit could be or should look like, you need to track both sides, right? You can't just track the revenue side. And I think that the good news is that in 2024, where there's a lot of technology out there, there's a lot of automation, it's actually not that hard to track your costs, right? So let's just take labor out of the equation because labor is a really difficult thing to track. Let's just start with the things that you buy your
Okay.
seed, compost, your soil, your drip irrigation, like whatever it is that you're spending in order to make money, right, on the farm, like you should keep all of the receipts. There are apps out there where you take a photo of the receipt and you upload it. And then there in the same app, you can even forward to a specific dedicated email address that's unique to your account to have that digital receipt uploaded. And what's really nice about that is now that's housed in a single repository, right? Where you log in and then you can start allocating, okay, like this receipt from Johnny's goes into seeds, right? This receipt from A.R.E, which is where I got those sleeves from, for the bouquets, that goes into like bouquet supplies or whatever, right? So you can start making kind of these categories, these high level categories of just where those expenses would fit in. And then next thing you know, at the end of the year, you can kind of take that step back and be like, okay, like 20% of my costs came from seeds, 30% came from compost, right? So I think that just utilizing technology is a really good first start. And, a lot of these will start off as free. And after you upload a certain amount of receipts, then it becomes paid. But, we're talking about $10 an hour, $10 an hour for you, or sorry, $10 a month. $10 a month for you to be able to track your costs and have a really good idea of just what to go into next year, right? Because then I could look at my costs and be like, okay, like I spent this percentage on compost. How can I get that down? Right? Or like now you have the data to start making decisions. So really it's about getting into a habit of tracking numbers.
I have my paper, my notes, because I do that every video that you have, and I'm just like taking all these notes because you just spit some amazing stuff, and it's awesome. And I hope that when people watch this replay, they are really soaking up and absorbing what it is that you're sharing because it's amazing. Okay, so what I wanted to talk about next is what makes a flower profitable to us and how do we calculate that information? I think it's kind of what we talked about almost, but maybe with a little twist because I don't want to jump on the bandwagon of $2 a stem for something because I picked that number or because that's the number that everybody else picks. I want to make sure that I'm charging for the supplies, the time, the flower. I want to make sure everything is in a, accounted for that. And it's even more important to me because I am working on my organic certification. And so I'm having to pay to be organic certified. And then I'm having to pay to have all organic inputs and organic seeds. And so my cost is so much more. And so I
Yep.
can't say because 90% of people sell this stem for $2, not this stem per se, but this stem for $2, that's what I need to charge. Like, no. And I need to make sure because if I don't do that up front right now, I start off losing, and that's not what I want.
Yeah, so I love what you just said there, right? Because how much I charge per stem to reach a profitable number that I'm happy with is going to look different for everyone, right? So I think that's the first thing to put out there, which is like pricing is so difficult for us to figure out, especially as new flower farmers. Like, yes, like we use benchmarks and guidelines based off of what other people are charging. And I would say that going into year 3 now with 2 years under my belt, the way that I approach this question is very different than in year 1. But before I actually get into that, I want to talk a little bit about just like this concept of what makes a flower profitable, because I now have 2 videos out for year 1 and year 2 on my most and least profitable flowers, and they are completely different flowers between the 2 years. And they are completely different flowers because I sold to completely different sales outlets, right? First year I was retail. And so certain flowers do really well in retail. The one that I always talk about is sunflowers. Sunflowers can be super, super profitable because of how quickly they grow and how quickly you can turn over beds, right? Like we're talking about like 60 days to maturity type of
Absolutely.
crop. And people love sunflowers, and think about like how cheap a sunflower seed is relative to how much money you could fetch per sunflower, right? So, but this year or this past year, I did not sell as much retail and I didn't grow as many sunflowers. So instead, my most profitable crops were actually crops that will probably not be super profitable for other people because I was able to grow them in such mass quantity that I benefited from something called economies of scale, where I'm selling like so much at a certain time that it makes up for the higher inputs, which in this case is like a bulb, right? So tulips, lilies, dahlias all make it onto that list for me this past year, right? So I think the first thing to note is that when you look at any YouTube video out there that's like my most and least profitable flowers, like that's for them. That's for their growing conditions, right? It's not going to look the same for everyone. So I want to take that concept and now parlay it into what we were talking about, which is like, how do you arrive at what that cost per stem or what you should be pricing per stem, right? And I think winter tulips are a really good example for me because it's so easy to dial in. So what changed this year for me was I started looking at my costs by tracking my labor, right? So I think before I did a good job of tracking non-labor costs, but I had not really gotten down to the detail that I needed for labor costs. I was always kind of just like estimating. So this time I put on a piece of paper literally for every single tray, hydroponic tray I was growing for tulips, what the like what all of the labor line items could potentially be. So for example, I have to root the bulbs, I have to water them in. I have to bring them in from the garage to my basement. I have to water them again, right? Because the water runs out. I have to harvest. I have to clean the tray. So each of those line items, I am tracking exactly how much time I'm spending on them. And then based off of that time, I now say, okay, so like each tray is taking, let's say, a full hour for me to do between all of those tasks. So what is my hour worth, right? So this year I'm raising it to $20 an hour, meaning if I were to pay myself, I would pay myself at a $20 per hour rate. That went up from $15, by the way. And then I asked myself, okay, so based off of these costs and what I had been charging per stem, am I happy with the profit that I was making? Because here's the thing, I was profitable per stem, but was I happy with that level of profitability? And the answer was no, because I was selling wholesale stems at anywhere from like $1.60 to $1.70 back in December. And I said, no, I need that number to be at least like $1.95, $2 minimum wholesale for work, right? So we're now not talking about are you profitable? We're talking about what degree of profitability are you happy with? So that's the standard going forward. Wholesale, nothing is below like $1.95 per stem. And then obviously, from my wholesale number, I now build what retail is going to look like. I'm in the situation where the florists who I sell to, I don't even call them florists, I call them designers, because they do design work, they do a lot of event work. So they can command this higher premium because, they are upcharging like 5 times the amount that they are. Bringing in, right? So for example, if a floral budget is $10,000, typically they're marking up the flowers by 5 times to get to that $10,000. So that means that their floral budget is $2,000. So I have the capability to really push a higher value per stem to sell to them versus if I were to go to like an everyday florist who is selling a bouquet arrangement for like $80, right? Like there's a huge difference in terms of the margin for the florist. So because of the types of florists who I sell to, I can command that $2 to $2.20 per stem, and people will happily pay for that. On the retail side, I do like a flower subscription or CSA. I sell a la carte bouquets. The per stem price is going to always be above that wholesale number that I sell to florists, but it's not like $3. So I would say that the delta or the gap between retail and wholesale for me is actually a lot smaller than it really should be. Especially like if I were to go out to like New York City and sell retail, right? Then I could probably see close to like a dollar gap, but right now that gap is really like about like 50 cents ish. So like those are like the different considerations for me. And that's another reason why I want to push more towards wholesale. I actually find it easier for me to push a higher price with the wholesale customers versus my retail customers.
Okay. So are we thinking $2 wholesale and then maybe 250 for retail and then maybe $3 for the CSA or customer?
I mean, I lump retail and CSA into like the same category. I would say the $3 range is
Okay.
are getting to like Valentine's Day, right? Like that's like a special occasion or like a Mother's Day where you can really get that premium per stem. I think that if I really searched hard, I could do $3 a stem retail. It's just that in my current neighborhood and kind of like even my objectives, which is making local flowers accessible to people, like, I don't want my price point to be crazy, ludicrous, and out of range for the everyday person, right? Like, so there's also a piece of just like, why am I growing? Like, I'm growing to lower the carbon footprint of imported flowers. So the best way of achieving that is to go after the people who are going to buy imported flowers, right? Florists. But for my local community, there are definitely people who probably wouldn't be buying flowers at all, and they are subscribing to my flower subscription, right? So for them, it's like it would be unreasonable to pay $30 every 2 weeks for a bouquet that they wouldn't have paid for anyway, right? So I think that there's also that piece too, which is just like, what are you trying to accomplish? Because that might also sway how you price.
I do want to comment. There is just a slight bit of, I'm not sure if it's delay or just a little bit of feedback. It's to me, it's I still can hear and understand everything you're saying, but just if there is any disconnect, just that people could treat it more like a podcast and just listen. Yeah, I think that that's a good point. With all the things that you said and why you're pricing it. And also, I think that when I'm talking about that, I think you don't do a lot of peonies and roses and a lot of specialty flowers that would actually warrant that, $3 price point, maybe even $4 price point. I think you keep it kind of simple.
I mean,
At least that's what I've seen.
later in the season, I do Lysianthus. When the
Mhm.
rose lilies come in, they command that like $4 price point. Last year, I did a lot of dahlias. I will actually be pulling back on dahlias. I just don't have the space this year, but those would all be those more premium crops, right? And so, again, if you don't have the how do you say this? Like, if you don't have people who are willing to pay for what those crops deserve, then you will also be less profitable, right? I want to emphasize that the $2 a stem that I get for tulips is for winter tulips. When it comes to spring field grown tulips, obviously everyone else has tulips around me, and there is just how do you say like a greater supply overall. I There's no way I can fetch $2 per stem wholesale unless if it's like a really sought after type of tulip. But most of the time, you're looking at a 30 to 40 cent drop in terms of pricing.
The more competition. That makes a lot of sense. And I was talking with someone, and what she was saying is there's two levels when it comes to profitability as well. The time that it takes me to harvest this, but then also like the quantity of it. And so I think that that kind of, yeah, makes a difference too. I think you talked a little bit about that as well. So I want to see what knowledge you have for newbies starting out, but not just newbies that are starting out, but like I really want you to talk to people who've been doing this for years and not seeing a profit because I think that we all like flowers. They look beautiful, but the flowers don't. Their beautiful looking selves don't pay the bills. And so I just want you to talk to people who find that they're not seeing a profit. I want you to talk to them and talk to newbies and just share your advice. What I don't want is seeing someone sell something like this for $5. What I don't want is what I've seen people having these beautiful little vases and bouquets, and they're saying $5.
Yeah. I would suspect that the people who aren't turning a profit after a couple of years probably don't fully, how do you say this? Or they're not fully aware of their numbers to even tell you, am I, like, not profitable by thousands of dollars, tens of thousands of dollars, or hundreds of dollars, right? Like, at the end of the day, you can be very profitable by having a profit of $1 or by having a profit of $10,000, right? And it's the same in the opposite direction too. I think that when it comes to people who are underpricing their stems, there's like two things going on, right? One, there's probably a bit of just mental, just not feeling like that you can price higher, right? That's something for us to internally work through to convince ourselves that, hey, like the stuff that we're growing is good. If you really
Yeah.
believe in your product, then it starts with you first to put it out there that it is a higher priced item. I always say that your pricing also communicates subtly to the end consumer as to the quality of your product, right? Like the bunch of tulips that you're holding in your hand right now, I would retail that minimum for $25. I think there's like what, like 10 or 12 cents. I can't remember what it was, but like, 25, $30, right? If you were to price that, let's just say for, we'll call it $10, right? What you're saying to the customer is that this is no different than a grocery store bouquet of tulips. And there are some parrots in there, there's some doubles in there. You're not going to see parrots and doubles at the grocery store, right? So, what are you subtly indicating to your customers by saying that they're only $10? So, that's the first thing. The second thing I would say is that if you're having a hard time increasing your price in the sense that people are just not buying at a higher price point, you're you're not looking at the right customer. Like when you think about just I always go back to the example of coffee. Like coffee is just such a good analogy because you've got gas station coffee at like the very low end, which where it's like $1 for a cup or even less. And then you've got very
Yeah.
high coffee where some people will pay like $10 for a cup of coffee, right? And then you've got so many options in the middle. So the person who's going into the gas station to buy coffee is certainly not going to Starbucks or not going to a specialty like coffee shop, right? So why is it that the specialty coffee shop and the gas station coffee can coexist in the same town and both be profitable and operate a thriving business? It's because they're going after completely different customers, right? So I think the number one complaint I see is my farmers market is not going to bear this price. And you're probably right. If you're at a farmers market and you're trying to price at like we'll call it a reasonable $20 bouquet, and no one is buying it, I would argue that you are at the wrong place trying to sell $20 bouquets. You would just need to figure out a different sales outlet and trying to attract a different group of people to pay that 20.
Yeah, I want to comment there because that was certainly true. The farmers market that I was at, it just wasn't it
Yeah,
wasn't it for
yeah.
me. And I had to admit that. And I remember I did this farmers market about 2 years ago. And maybe it could have been my STEM, maybe it could have been my presentation, it could have been those things, or it could have just not been the right place. And I remember my highest day there probably was like 120 something dollars. And I remember this past 2023, I went to one market and I made like $45 for the day. I drove an hour there, I drove an hour back. I said, okay, I'm gonna try it one more time. I went there, I made $85. I'm like, to drive 2 hours, this isn't worth it. And so the market that I'm looking into getting into this year, I've heard people say that they have made um, almost $1,000 a weekend and some even more. And so I say that to say, and I know because the thing is, we really want to support and grow community, but if community can't support and help us grow,
Yes.
we have to make some tough decisions because at the end of the day, I shared that you had one baby. I have five children, and I have a son that's about to graduate. So at the end of the day, like I need to bring in what I need to bring in, and that's just the reality. And so, as much as I want to build and establish community, at the end of the day, I need to sell and I need to move my products. And so, um, by me transferring to this other market or gonna go there, we'll come back and have this conversation later and see like how things worked out for me, stepping away from community to see if I could get more. And I think it's important that people don't get stuck. Like, I think sometimes we feel a lot of obligation or duty, or like I said, location or community. But I think that we can um, be free, right? To to move around however we need to move around in our business. And I think that's kind of what you were saying. When you started, you were selling to one group of people and then you moved to another group of people. And I want you to maybe speak more to that, and share more. But I definitely want to say that it's okay if you try something and it doesn't work, or it
Yeah.
doesn't work the way you think, or you need to restart over or go back to the drawing table. I think that's a wise person that would do that instead of heading down this path where, like, how many times did I need to go to that market to see that I wasn't going to be profitable?
Yeah, I mean, there's a word in the startup community, it's called pivot, right? So changing
Mhm.
direction from the direction that you thought you were going to go through. If you're a small business and you're not constantly pivoting, I would argue that chances are you're not extremely successful, but you're a little too comfortable in doing something that may not be the best
Mhm.
choice for the business, we'll call it, right? So you should be challenging yourself to ask, hey, like, do I need a pivot, right? I do want to say that a farmer's market, despite what we just said, is a really, really good sales outlet for the beginner flower farmer, for a couple of reasons. Because it's one of those sales outlets where you are guaranteed a spot to go to bring product, but you're not forced to bring certain amount of product or certain kinds of product, right? Almost like there's a very low threshold, as bad as it sounds,
Mhm.
for
Mhm.
what you need to bring, right? So, for example, when I sell to florists, I need to project, hey, I'm going to have this available a week out. I like sometimes my projections are wrong. Like it gets really stressful trying to say, okay, I said I was going to have 10 bunches of this white stock, but I only have 4 bunches, right? So like there's a level of stress that comes with other sales outlets that a farmer's market doesn't have, and that is offset by the fact that a farmer's market is, to your point, very, very labor intensive, right? Like there's the driving, there's staffing it, there's not knowing who's going to show up and all that stuff. So like at a lot of farmers market, you basically pre-commit for a whole season and you can't necessarily leave in the middle of season, or you can't even leave if you've sold out during that day, right? So signing up for a farmer's market is a really big commitment, but I think it is a really good sales outlet for that really beginner type of flower farmer. I also think that there's this notion of opportunity cost, and this is a terminology that I talk about often. And it's really this concept of like, by saying yes to doing something, I am inherently saying no to something else, right? So in your case, Grace, you have 5 kids. By saying yes to the farmer's market, I am saying no in terms of everything else I could be doing, like even laundry, right? Like I'm sure you have a
Yeah.
piling up and you're looking at that laundry, you're like, I need to get it done, right? So like the opportunity cost is not always business related. I think that the worst opportunity cost is actually related to time that we have with our loved ones and you sacrificing that time, right? And is that worth the time that you are spending on the business part if you're not being deliberate about making like a profit out of it, right? So like if you're losing money, then I would argue that unless if you're doing it as like a passion or like a hobby, right? You really need to reevaluate what you're doing. So I think that like just this concept, like if I say yes to this, what am I saying no to? Is a really good and powerful question for people to ask themselves before committing to anything.
Yeah, I agree. So, I don't want to hold you and take up your time. Your time is so precious. I'm so grateful. So, do you have anything else that you could share with us before? you leave, whether it's, I don't know, I didn't see any questions, but I didn't know if you had any questions as far as, I don't know, flowers, or not questions, but if you had any advice as far as flowers or as far as pricing or spacing. Did you have anything else that someone new would watch this video and be like, wow, that was amazing? I'm really glad I
Well,
watched that video.
I don't know what I'm about to say is, wow, that's amazing. But I think that it is often very common for a new grower as well as an experienced grower to feel very overwhelmed and just feel like what is going on. I feel like I have my head cut off. And I always say that if you're running a small business, if you don't feel like you just jumped out of an airplane and you're building the parachute after jumping out, you're not doing stuff right. Right? Like, running a business is always going to be challenging, and I think some of the best advice I got early on in my other side hustle business was more money, more problems, right? So we often think about, oh, like, once I achieve the six-figure number, like, all my problems are going to go away. No, you're going to have more problems, you know. So it's just a reality of what it's like to own a small business, and I think a lot of people go into flower farming not realizing that you're actually going into owning a business. You're not just flower farming, right? Like, if you didn't want to get caught up in the business of it, then just grow flowers. Just give them away, right? Don't give yourself that pressure. But if you're challenging yourself to say, hey, like, I want to grow and sell and create some supplemental income for my family, then you've inherently taken on a business, right? So you should feel like that you are constantly being challenged and figuring things out, because if you're not, then you're not actually pushing yourself, right, to do better.
I love that. I love that a lot. Well, I would you tell everybody how they can find you and what they can expect to see from you this year, 2024? Where are you from? So she is from Jersey, New Jersey, and I am in Virginia. So we're both grow in zone 7, but grow in zone 7 and 7A and 7B.
Yep.
And so
You
she also has this winter program that if anybody wants to um, purchase, any of her winter forest tulips, you can definitely head over. She'll tell you where you can find her there. She'll tell you all of her YouTube, her Instagram. She'll tell you where to find her. And yeah, just tell us what things you have in store for us this year. What can we expect to see more of? I know that you've already said you're cutting some of your space. I know that next year you're going to be increasing these because that's what works for you. And I think I didn't get to mention it. I didn't think about it when I was writing my questions for you. I was just so excited to have you come and talk and share all the number things because I'm a number geek and it just makes me happy. But I think another part that I just want to say really quick while we close that I find is interesting is that you actually take a break. When most flower farms are, kind of in full swing, you're taking a break. And I kind of like that. I like that you do what works for you. And, you do work, more so when it's cold so that when it's hotter, you don't have to work as much.
Yeah, I would like to take a longer break, which is something that I'm working towards in 2025. Like, I'll probably cut out Lysianthus and really just like the summer warm annual loving crops. But I would say for 2024, my goal is to double my flower sales. So last year I sold about 10,500. The plan is to get to 20,000, and I was saying through 70% wholesale. So you'll definitely see a lot more content on the wholesale side, but I will still keep a bit of retail. From a YouTube perspective, one of the things that I've really been wanting to do is actually more interviews with the average flower farmer. And when I say average, I just mean like someone who is maybe like well known in their community, but obviously
Mhm.
not be known nationally, right? There are a
That's right.
yeah, there are a ton of
Yeah.
people who are doing this on the side, who are doing this full time, who have a lot of stuff to offer us in terms of wisdom. So, and honestly speaking, it's also nice talking to people who aren't necessarily out there trying to sell you a course, right? So,
Right, exactly.
yeah. So my goal is to be able to do those interviews more frequently. Like, it's something that I did a little bit last year, but the goal is to at least do like 1 or 2 a month if possible. So I actually have someone who's coming on this week to talk about how she scaled her CSA to 45 shares. And this is a person who lives in upstate New York. You know, she's not like in a big town or anything. And over like 4 years, she's gotten to 45 shares, which I think is actually like really impressive, right? So, like, just content like that. And then, of course,
Yeah.
you're going to a lot more profitability related stuff. You know, I think it's really funny because people always say, like, yeah, I'm really interested in the marketing side, in the profit side, and all that stuff. And I know that you looked at my most popular videos. And yes, from a view count perspective, the most and least profitable flowers is my most popular. But honestly, do you know what my most popular videos are? They're
What are
not
they?
they're not related to that stuff. They're actually related to like species specific type of videos like snapdragons or
Yes,
stuff,
yes,
right?
that is next.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So I think that like my realization was that people like want to do this. It's like I aspire to save for retirement, but at the end of the day, I want to just grow type of thing, right?
Mhm.
So it's sometimes hard to put out this kind of content knowing that even though people say they want it, I don't think that they've push themselves to watch it and really absorb all of it. It's almost like we're burying our heads in the sand. So I'm actually trying
Mhm.
to get like I'm trying to figure out like how do I get people to be more motivated to want to learn about this stuff.
Yeah, I think what you're doing is great. I think, in full transparency, I did when I was doing my research onto your channel, and of course, I've watched probably 3/4 of your videos, but the videos I watch are not how to grow a Lysianthus or how to grow a snap, and you don't have that one. I think you have how to grow a snapdragon, how to grow this, how to grow that, but those are not the videos that I watch. I am watching for the profit. I'm watching stem per count. The video that I loved the most, I was just like, "Oh!" was when you were talking about the spacing and the stem
Yeah.
count and
Yeah.
this flower would give you this many. Oh my goodness. And when you put together the bouquet, you need this many plants to get this many bouquets. I was like, yes, this is the stuff that my mind needs because if I can have, okay, I need to start with these plants to get to this end. Okay, I know. I can just start with these plants. And so that's what I'm doing over this next 2 weeks is I am starting my seedlings
Yeah.
because it's too I can't afford to buy. This is I've been transparent about my journey from on, 0 what 0.03 acres here to now 6.22 acres. I've been very honest and transparent. I can't afford to buy as many transplants as I would need to start this, the flower farm this year, to start the herbs and the vegetables. It would be probably three, four, $5,000, if not more, especially being organic on top of that. So for me to know this is how many zinnias you need and this is the buffer that you need, that's beautiful. That's
Yeah.
priceless. And
I
then
I
I know how to make my plan.
Yeah. I think that one of the most underrated videos that I made in the last quarter was a video around maximizing your revenue from a certain space, thinking about like turnover and all that stuff. That one to me is actually one of the best videos that I've made when it comes to this topic because the point that I was trying to make in that video was that you've got these like specialty sexy crops like Lysianthus or dahlias, right?
Mhm.
You got
Mhm.
these like very just like everyday average crops like zinnias and sunflowers. And I can tell you that in the course of a full season, you will likely make very close to, in terms of revenue, the amount off of a bed of sunflowers that you turn over 3 times versus a bed of Lysianthus, right? So, from a numbers perspective, they're actually quite comparable. Obviously, it's going to take you more work to turn over the beds
Right.
to do the sunflowers, but there's this other consideration, which is just like, when do you need flowers? Do you need flowers like
Mhm.
every other week? Do you need flowers only like certain times of the season? Because
Exactly.
relying on
Exactly.
lisianthus, you're only going to get a like flush for 2 weeks, right? Versus your bed of sunflowers, you can constantly turn it over and get consistent blooms. And that's one of the things that beginner flower farmers don't really think about is just like, I need consistent blooms, especially if I'm going to do something like a farmer's market. And if I plant something like a lisianthus in an area where I am, growing space constrained, I'm not doing myself a favor for all those other months of the year when I need flowers. And the lisianthus are just, growing like at the speed of a snail's pace, right?
Yeah, it's very true. When you see me looking down, it's because I'm taking notes. I also want to piggyback on that and just say that actually you get a lower cost as well. And in regards
Yeah.
to what you're saying about the 3 beds of turning over the how cheap is this? I mean, well, it's not that cheap, but how cheap is a sunflower in compared to a lisianthus, right? Like that
Yeah.
tray of lisianthus is gonna cost plus the shipping, or if you do it yourself, you have to like start it in January. And for me personally, I told you I was trying to become, well, I'm finishing up my paperwork to become USDA nationally certified organic. But here's the deal: Lisianthus is one of those things that's not approved.
Yeah, because the pellet,
I could not sell,
the pellet is not organic.
so
So
I couldn't even sell it. Yeah, so I mean, it works out for me, but I think that's really good. I hope people really stay to this part to see that, you know what, I don't have to have the most expensive what everybody else is having. I can just have simple and plain and let my simple and plain be good. And the
yeah,
only other thing that I wanted to just add to that is really, really, really dissecting those seed packets. I made the mistake of getting some seeds and they had a longer bloom time. So one of the companies that I am doing a lot more buying from is from Fruition Seed, and they're based in New York, so they have a lower or less growing days.
mhm,
We have long growing days, right, because of our zone, but they have a short growing day. So that particular seed company is geared towards short growing seasons. And so I looked at a pair, like the back of one of my sunflowers. I was like, oh my goodness, this sunflower was like 90 days. And another one was like 110 days. And so I could have had almost two, but the way that I'm going to do it is I'm going to plant them all together. And so it'll still work out as if I did like some succession sowing, even though I'm technically not. It's just their bloom time. But
yeah,
again, it is taking up bed space. And I'm just saying that to go with what you're saying about that's one of the most important things, especially if we don't have a lot of space. Yes, I have a lot of acres, but I'm only growing 7 beds that are 70 feet long and 30 inches wide. And so I really want to maximize my space. And the way to do that is high turnarounds and not
yeah,
something that's going to be there for 110 days. Like I was like, what was I thinking when I got these sunflowers? Oh my
yeah.
goodness. So anyway, do you have anything else to say before we end?
Yeah, so you had asked before where people can find me. I'm on
Mhm.
Instagram at Bear Flower Farms. That's B.A.R.E. Flower Farm. I do a lot of stories just so you guys can see what's happening. So this time of year, obviously a lot of tulip related stuff. And of course, I
Mhm.
have a YouTube channel that focuses on the business side of flower farming.
Yes, yes, yes. And I love it. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you for being here. Um,
Yeah,
obviously,
I'm
what
glad
you do is
they arrived because they were delayed because of the storm. So that is what tulips look like when they're shipped. They were supposed to be shipped on overnight, but they took 2 days to
Mhm,
arrive. And you can see that they are still alive and perky. And tulips just possess this amazing ability to be rehydrated in a way that many other
mhm.
flowers cannot. So if you ever have tulips and they go limp, like if you're like storing them, don't fret, give them a good cut, give them a good drink, and they will perk up within like 6 hours.
Yes. Do I have OnlyFans? No, I don't even know what that is.
I think that's
Do you
good.
have
I
OnlyFans?
better call to wrap up this call.
Yeah. Yeah, we're going now, but I don't have OnlyFans, and I don't think that she does either. I don't think that we know what
We
that
should
is. But anyway, thank you so much. I really appreciate you. I hope that you enjoy the rest of your day.
You
And
too.
peace and blessings to everyone.
Have a good one.